Welcome to XYPN Radio, where your host Alan Moore brings you into a community of fee-only financial planners who want to profitably and successfully serve Gen X and Gen Y clients. If you're ready to get the knowledge you need from leaders in your field, learn from forward-thinking advisors, and take action on your own goals, XYPN Radio is the show for you. Here's your host.
Hey everyone, this is Alan Moore, host of XYPN Radio, and I have to say, how can you not get pumped up from that intro? What a phenomenal job of setting up so that we have to be super high energy as we kick off the first ever episode of XY Planning Network Radio. It is so fitting that our first episode is actually going to be with XYPN co-founder Michael Kitces, who most of you probably have already heard of. If you haven't, you probably have not been around financial planning all that long, but you're going to get an awesome introduction to him in this episode. If you ever hear Michael talk, it's typically content-based. He's just so brilliant when it comes to providing education to advisors. But today is all about Michael's career path. It's a story that very few people, I think, have actually ever heard. And so it was an awesome opportunity to just get an inside look into what it took for Michael to become kind of the king nerd of financial planning. Michael drops a ton of value bombs in this episode, including telling this awesome story about how he tried to get a job as an associate advisor and asked for a $25,000 a year salary, only to be told no. Hard to believe given where he's at today, but that's where he started. I think this is an episode that you're going to really enjoy. I know I had a ton of fun talking with Michael. Now, before we kick off the interview, I do want to give a quick shout out to our sponsor of Launch Week, Low Load Insurance Services. They handle life, disability, annuity, long-term care insurance for fee-only financial advisors. And honestly, we do want to thank Low Load Insurance Services because we would not have been able to make this podcast happen without them. Be sure to check them out at llis.com, or you can also tune in for episode 5 for an in-depth interview with Mark Maurer, the CEO of Low Load Insurance Services. So without further ado, here is our interview with Michael Kitces. Hey everyone, welcome to this episode of XYPN Radio. I am so excited to have XYPN co-founder and a very good friend of mine, Michael Kitces, on the call. Normally I would do a bio introduction, but I don't even know where I would start, and that's what the purpose of today's call is. So Michael, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Alan. Good to be here. I love, the one good thing about doing a podcast with a partner is that they know how to pronounce your name.
Yes, we have Mr. Kitces, Kitces. What else do we have? Kitces. That's another very common one.
Yes. So for those who are wondering on the listening on the podcast, Kitces, like
there's no good way.
I don't like.
There's no good way to
crunch that. KIT-SIS.
Kitces. So for everybody out there. And first name is Michael, for anybody wondering. No, we are thrilled to have Michael on the show. Today, we're actually going to do something a little different. If you are a follower of the Kitces blog or any of the other various mediums, you hear a lot of Michael's great content. And I can give you a heads up that in the future, we are definitely going to have Michael on. The two of us will be co-hosting some interviews together, and we will do some back and forth, more co-hosted style episodes. But today is really an interview with Michael to get some of his backstory. It's something that not a lot of people know, is kind of how Michael became Nerd's Eye View, Kitces.com speaker extraordinaire. And so it's a really fascinating journey that I think a lot of people assume, like I did when I first met Michael, that Michael's been around on the speaking circuit for a decade. And really, it actually hasn't been that long. He's made a name for himself very quickly in actually a very short amount of time. Even though he is much older than he likes to admit, he's actually much younger than most people would probably assume given his resume. But he looks his age, so that's fair. So, Michael...
I'm not sure, was that a compliment or not?
I love it, right? I make fun of Michael for being old, and he makes fun of me for not knowing who REM is, as we were talking about on the pre-call. Apparently, it's a really good band from the 90s. So, anyway, so Michael, let's just start with a little bit of your backstory. You did not get your degree in financial planning. So how did you discover, I guess, what was your kind of college path into kind of career mode in general?
So you're right. I didn't know anything about financial planning in college. I went to a New England liberal arts school, Bache College up in Maine. So, as I like to put it, that classic New England liberal arts experience, we teach you to think but prepare you for nothing in particular. But you're good thinkers, so go forth and be successful. And it was an interesting dynamic for me. So I was a psych major, theater minor, and actually a pre-med student. And this was the era of the 90s. This was the era of ER. So seriously, I was watching ER. I wanted to be an ER doctor. And I was interning in the local hospitals and was actually an EMT locally in the town. And got to the end of my senior year of college and, started looking to okay, I'm graduating. What's next? And, so as a psych major, theater minor, pre-med student, the only thing I really figured out by the end of college was that I definitely did not want to go into psychology, theater, or medicine.
So eliminated 3 major options. So I guess that's better than nothing.
Yes. So I was narrowing the world down very efficiently. And so I was getting ready to graduate and needed a job. So it's kind of a strange story how I actually landed in financial services. So my grandmother, or I should really say my grandfather sadly passed away when my mother and her sister were fairly young. And so my grandmother had to go out and work on her own as a single mother to support 2 young daughters. And so she went to work for a life insurance agent. She was essentially a secretary sales assistant for a life insurance agent for many, many years. And so the life insurance agent, and I guess would be the classic fashion of the 60s and 70s era, when my mother got married, the life insurance agent, so my mother's boss, his secretary's daughter was getting married. So what was the gift that he gave his secretary's daughter for getting married? He wrote a life insurance policy on the new husband, my father. So my father had this random whole life policy from the 70s when my parents first got married that he kept all the way through. So, great gift that keeps on giving. The guy wrote a life insurance policy and got my father to pay the premiums for the rest of his life. So the guy had long since retired from the business, and so my father still had this life insurance policy that now no longer had an agent, which for those in the business know, these are often called orphaned policies. And so what a lot of insurance companies do is they'll actually let new reps or even sales managers go out and basically call on orphan policies looking for business opportunities. And so my father got a call about this old orphan policy. And an agent came out to see him and, went through and did a review of the policy. And here's where it stands now. And then as the meeting was wrapping up, it turns out the guy was not only a insurance agent with the company, he was also a sales manager. So he took off his agent's hat. He put on his sales manager hat. And he said, by the way, I'm also, our company is hiring. Do you know anyone who might want to come into the business? It's a great opportunity. And my father said, well, actually, my son is graduating in about 2 months and he has no idea what he wants to do. So my father got me an interview with a sales manager from the life insurance company, this guy who'd come to him to review the orphan policy. And, he gave me the full pitch of, this is a great industry and you've got unlimited income potential. And we just want really good, hard workers who are smart people. And, this entire business is what you can make of it. And all those things that sound great when you're a 22-year-old testosterone driven male. And I totally bought it and thought it was great. And so I came directly out of college to be a life insurance agent, truly graduated Memorial Day weekend. So graduated on Saturday, packed all my stuff up on Sunday. Memorial Day Monday, I drove everything home. And first thing Tuesday morning, I reported for work at New England Life, which is now a subsidiary of MetLife. And that was my start in the business. It was completely random. I had no connection to the industry. I took Econ 101 my senior year as a lighter course while I was working on my thesis. That was my only connection to the finance world at all.
So you really kind of follow the classic model of some, they tend to hire folks into finance and I guess product sales that are have no background in finance, we'll just say. So how did you make the transition then from life insurance agent, which it doesn't sound like you did very long, into kind of the financial planning world?
Yeah, no. So life insurance didn't last for me terribly long. As I ultimately well, I was going to say, as I ultimately figured out, it didn't take me that long to figure out. It was a sales job, and I was not a very good salesperson. Or actually, to be fair, I was probably a decent salesperson, but I was a terrible prospector. And, if you can't find anybody to get in front of, it doesn't really matter if you could sell, and you're just out of business, and that's that. So it was going poorly. Now, a couple months in, I'd already kind of figured out, all right, I'm really not good at this prospecting thing, which means I don't have anybody to sell. But I do like doing analytical stuff. So I ended up kind of mentoring myself under one of the insurance agents that was at the firm, who was basically the most financial planning oriented of anybody there. Those days, your ability to do planning in an insurance agency was more limited than it is today. But he was a CFP, CLU, CHFC, like really approached every client from the perspective of, I just want to understand your situation and we'll just help you with whatever it is you need. Every now and then it turns out to be an insurance policy, and our company has great products, but we can help you in other ways as well. And I was just fascinated by the approach, like coming into a world of traditional life insurance sales, where it really did feel like we've got one hammer, so every problem looks like a nail, and like every scenario was, how can we fit a life insurance sale into this situation? Unfortunately, like that was many of my colleagues at the time. Here was this one guy that said, oh, well, instead of just going out with a life insurance policy every time and trying to fit it into the client's situation, why don't you go out and ask about the client situation and then just give them whatever they need? Because they'll probably need something and you can do business with them. And that just seemed way more logical to me. So like that was my first glimpse. That was my first understanding of life insurance. Now, the sad thing in that agency was the gentleman who was running it at the time was actually still one of the best natural born salesmen I've ever met. Like, he started in the business selling life insurance door to door in I think like the late 50s and early 60s. Was one of these guys, like, still, he could drop into his sales pitch like at the drop of a hat. You could like ask him to do it as a party trick now. Like he would go off, incredible communicator. One of these guys, like, there'll be a knock at your door and 5 minutes later you're standing in your living room talking about whatever's hanging above your mantle. And you're like, how the hell did we get here? Like, he was that good. But because of that, he had no idea how to train or develop people, because all he knew was the more you go out there and see people and the harder you work, the more successful you are, because he was a natural born salesman. So he didn't really know how to help anyone. And the only thing he knew was find more salespeople. So I still remember the day I went back to him. I was almost a year into the business. And I said, basically, look, we both know I'm not getting it done in this sales job, but I would like to basically be like a planning assistant person, and I will just help do like all the financial planning analysis work for all the other agents in the firm. There were like 15 to 20 out of our office. We were using financial profiles, which is actually still around. So I was like, I will do all the financial profiles analysis stuff, and I will help all the other advisors, and I will do all this work if you will just give me a salary of $25,000.
Ooh, that's a big ask.
That was my ask. He turned me down cold.
Now, I have to jump ahead. Have you had any conversations with him recently about that turn down?
I have not. He, I believe, has since retired out of the industry. Now, I am actually still in close connection with the original sales manager who hired me in, who does know that I had made that pitch to stick around, and the general agent had turned me down, which was what left me to leave the firm. But yeah, I'm not sure he's entirely aware of quite how my career has progressed since he affirmed that I was not worth $25,000 to do basically financial planning analytical support.
Too funny. Wow, what a nice shift. And those are one of those instances where failure is a win, probably.
Yeah. So it was like, okay, I'm not getting it done as sales. I can't get this guy to pay me $25,000 to sit in front of a computer and use financial planning software and just be a support person. So I guess I'm going to have to look for alternatives. So I started digging around for alternatives. Went to the good old want ads, searched around. And, and I guess like steer stubbornness, it never even occurred to me to leave the industry. I just started looking for other jobs in the industry. But I had a little bit more of a sense now. I was into it a year. I knew I really didn't want to be on the sales side of things. I needed some kind of back office job. I knew I liked the planning side of things because I liked this approach where you figure out people's problems and solve them instead of coming to them with a product and just trying to give it to them. So I searched around. So I ended up finding another job relatively quickly with a firm in the area that into a job that I guess now I would basically call a blend of like a paraplanner and a client service associate person. So about a third of my job was handling like account openings and transfers and, tracking down ACAT and non-ACAT transfers and doing insurance and annuity applications and things like that. But then the other 2/3 of my job was I was actually doing like the exact financial planning analytical work that I wanted to do at the first place, but they said, no, this firm did it. And they were, I guess by today's standards, like they were just a couple of good guys who worked under an independent broker dealer who led with financial planning and then implemented whatever people needed at the end of the plan. And we knew as long as we were working with people of reasonable affluence who were approaching retirement, there were inevitably going to be a whole bunch of things that they would need. And we would do them. So some people might have needed annuity solutions. Some people needed long-term care insurance. Some people needed help with their investment portfolios. Whatever it was, just we did whatever they needed. We had a great partnership with a law firm in the area, so we would also help them do their estate planning, set up their living trusts. We would fund the trusts and do all of the paperwork to support them. So I got like really intensive experience into what it's like actually funding living trusts and going through all of that process. And it was a great time for me. Like I had a stable job. I didn't have to go out and sell. I didn't have to go out and find clients. My job was just to be awesome at what I was doing. And so I got into the education side and just was fascinated by it. So I enrolled myself in the CFP. I plowed through it. I wanted to do more. I went and got my CLU next to my CHFC. Then I started on my master's degree in financial planning, all while I was working full time. And just like this was consuming my nights and weekends because, I'm a geek and like reading. These are the things that I do. And so suddenly 18 months later, I kind of had a new problem. I was a CFP, CLU, CHFC, mostly done with a master's degree and still doing my paraplanner client service job that I was quickly outgrowing, and they didn't really know what to do with me. Right. Like all they had was like, well, you could go out and get clients now, which I had no interest in doing. But like there was nowhere else. There was nowhere to move up. It was still a relatively small firm. It was 3 producers and about 7 or 8 support staff. Actually, a decent sized firm for an IBD office of the time. But there were people who went out, got clients, and then admin staff and paraplanners and nothing in between. So they just didn't know what to do with me next. And so I had to start looking at alternatives.
I hope that many of our younger listeners, especially if you're still in college or you're in that first job, if you meet Michael or you meet myself, you probably realize that we are the least likely people to want to do account opening forms. It is not fun. And yet we all kind of started there, and so it is one of those things that, it is part of cutting your teeth. Even, Michael Kitces, who you don't think of as somebody who was doing that kind of work, that's where that foundation gets laid. And yet did a lot of hustle to get the education needed to move up, because if you don't get that education, you're still going to be sitting kind of in that same position, probably long term.
Oh, absolutely. Like, eventually I found I needed to move on from those positions. I needed things that were new, fresh, interesting challenges for me. We all want to stay kind of stimulated and motivated, but I don't regret for a moment, frankly, either of those positions. I guess things always become fuzzier when you kind of look at it in the distant rearview mirror. But truly, I don't even look back on the insurance job and view it as like, well, yeah, I started out my career and I failed. Like by any rational measure, I was failing as a life insurance agent. I was like barely qualifying my contract, and only because literally part of my contract validation in my first year was selling an annuity to my grandmother. It was actually a decent one. It matured 10 years later, but like I was barely getting by. But I don't even view it like, I don't think about it as a failure. It was just, I did this job for a while. I learned the realities of what it's like going out there and needing to prospect for your clients. That left a very indelible impression on me about how hard that is. If I'd never done it, I just would not have understood the challenges of that, which were very important for me later in my career to be able to reflect on that. And likewise, while I would not relish doing, the kind of paperwork things now that I did for that, 18, 20 month stint, whatever it was in the second firm that I was at, I'm so glad I did it. I have an understanding of how accounts get open and transfers get done, and the difference between ACAT and non-ACAT, and just all the things that go on that are still relevant today in understanding just the guts of how the business gets done. So Yeah, I don't relish doing it. I didn't love it when I was doing it. I was happy when I was ready to move on. But I really do view it as kind of an integral first step. It's why even when people come to me and they ask for advice about getting into the industry and what they should do, and well, I was just like, number one, I tell them is start working towards your CFP, because if you care about being a planner, that is the future. But number two to it is like, don't stress too much about finding like the one right perfect job, your first job out coming into the industry. Find a job. Try to find a job with people that you're proud to be affiliated with and not embarrassed by or anything. But just get a job and get started, because there's a level of just learning and understanding the industry. Like, you can only research it so much ahead of time. At some point, you just have to live it and do it for a while to really understand and internalize the industry. And then you can figure out what's appealing for you, what's not, what's relevant, what's not, and where do you want to take your career from there. And I mean, I didn't do that deliberately as I was building my career, because I didn't know who to ask for advice at the time. But like, that's definitely what I did looking back. And there are certainly jobs that I had for a period of time and moved on from, but I don't even reflect back on them as failures. I'm trying not to make this sound like a euphemism. I really don't mean it this way. Like, they weren't failures to me. They were just learning experiences, or like they were just stepping stones.
It's really great advice. And I totally agree. It's that even the circumstances, because many of our listeners will know that I got fired from one of my jobs, and I don't view that as a failure. It's just one of those things that you learn from it and you kind of move on.
And I'm just giggling because for those of you who hadn't heard Alan and I talk before, I call Alan unemployable. So the idea that he would get fired is not the least bit surprising to me. He's a little bit too entrepreneurially driven to be anything but working for himself as an entrepreneur. But frankly, like, even in that context, I'm sure this was your experience. You had to learn that. So like, you had to learn that about yourself to some extent. You know, not very many people come in with like the unlimited confidence to say, hey, I just graduated from college, so I think I'm going to open a firm from scratch. You still, like, even in your path as an entrepreneur, you had to come in. Yeah, I mean, you spent a couple of years in 2 or 3 different firms before you got to the point where you said, okay, now I feel like I've got enough of my footing under me to go out and to launch a firm, right? And you were going through the same thing. Like, what do those first early jobs look like? You know, financial planning, data input, and account paperwork, and just like all those things that we have to learn and do at some point. I don't want to do that for 5 years. If you're stuck in a job doing that for 5 years and not moving up, that's a problem. But like, doing that for a period of time, that's valuable experience. That's learning your trade. That's not even just a pay your dues kind of thing. That's like, you do need to understand how this stuff works.
And
don't
it's
get stuck
hard
doing
to
it
learn
forever, but you got to learn it, and you got to learn it by doing it.
And it's really hard to learn without doing.
Yes.
Okay, so you were at the second firm. You're 24, 25 years old, it sounds like. And then what was the path to kind of getting to Pinnacle, which is the current RIA that you're with?
So I went looking for another job. I kind of outgrew this position. That I didn't know what to do with myself. They didn't know what to do with me. We parted on very good terms, but like, just I outgrew the position, and they didn't have another one. So I went searching around and found this job ad for a firm named Pinnacle. Actually found it on the FPA's website, Financial Planning Association website. It had a pretty robust career site back then. And so I found this job for a firm that was hiring this awesome sounding position called Director of Financial Planning. And the job was basically, we are a growing firm. We are looking for someone that wants to focus on building and crafting the financial plans that we deliver for our clients, helping us to create the deliverable plan thing that we bring to our clients, and making our process and our plan recommendations and analysis better for our clients. And it was like a eureka moment for me, like, holy crap, like, this is exactly what I want to do.
It's what you asked for, and asked for $25,000 to do it.
Yes. And like, career was moving forward at that point. I suppose I should actually put some numbers to it so it would be helpful. So first interesting to recognize. So I went to the insurance agency manager. I asked for this job for $25,000. He turned me down cold. I had no choice but to look for alternatives. The firm that I landed at paid me, I think it was $42,000.
Oh my goodness.
To basically do the job that it turned me down for $25,000 for. So, again, first, that whole like we get so wrapped up in our little world sometimes and don't look broader. Like, it felt so depressing at the time that I offered my heart and soul to do this job for 25 grand, and he said no. And 2 weeks later, I had a job offer for 42 to basically do the same thing at a firm that cared more about what I wanted to do anyways.
That's an incredible jump.
Yeah. So it turned out that was good, because then I built there at the firm. They did give me some very nice raises. I think I was in the high 50s as I was approaching the 2-year mark for them, and then about to leave with them, particularly because I was getting some nice bonuses because the firm was doing well and having some good years. And so actually the first kind of interesting career dynamic. So Pinnacle had this job for director of financial planning for 50 grand when I first went out for the job, which was tough for me. I was in this position where I was a valuable part of a team making $57,000 or $58,000 or something, and relative to the fact that I'd been turned down for 25 2 years earlier, this was amazing. But I was in basically a dead end job because the only way to move up was a sales position I didn't want. Or I could go to this new firm that had this cool sounding position of director of financial planning that was basically what I wanted to do, but it was going to pay 50 grand. And granted, this is 13 or 14 years ago, so 50 grand went a little further then than it did today. But the key point to it and the piece I had to get over, it was a step back. I took a 15% pay cut to make the transition into this job because I was just really excited about the potential of what the job could be, and that this was a firm that was much better positioned to growth and even more serious about financial planning. They wanted this planner person because everything they did was planning first, and then they would help manage portfolios second, but they were getting pretty good at the portfolios. They were trying to improve the planning process, and so that was the opportunity, and really became kind of a one step back for 2 steps forward. But the reason I reflect on it is, in the context for maybe some of the folks that are listening here and navigating their own career track, it worked because I was living like I was still in college. I was living dirt cheap. So we were 3 years out of school. I was 3 years out of school at that point, and still living in an apartment I was splitting with 2 buddies. I was probably paying $350 a month or something in rent. And I live in the DC area. So a single apartment, even then in a decent neighborhood, would have cost me $1,500 a month.
Yeah, that's incredibly cheap.
And I was paying $350 a month or so. It was $300 a month out of the gate, but it was probably $350 by then because they raised the rent a couple of times. And so the fact that my core living expenses, my rent was 5% of my income or whatever that adds up to be. It was so low, and the rest of my living expenses were so low that aside from getting over the mental hurdle of, all right, it kind of sucks, I'm taking a 15% pay cut, but I'm going to do it for the potential of this job, I could make the change because I kept my living expenses lean enough that it wouldn't be a problem to do the transition. And frankly, that's been a big deal for me for several of kind of the job changes and advancements that I've had for my career over the years is, living on way less than I make gives the latitude to make those kinds of shifts and changes and be able to take 1 step back to take 2 steps forward.
Because that really does provide flexibility whenever you're tied into really high expenses and, a high mortgage and high car payments and all of those things, that it limits your ability, like you said, to take that step back into a better position knowing that it had more growth potential. Because if you had turned down that position, then because you weren't willing to take a 15% step back, then you would not be in the position that you're in today with that firm.
Yeah, it was a huge impact. I was living in a cheap apartment. I was splitting with a couple of buddies. God, this was '02. I was driving a cheap car I literally bought off of eBay.
I've never heard of anybody that bought a car on eBay.
I bought a car off eBay. It was $3,000. I had to drive 100 miles to go pick it up. It was a 4-year-old used Kia. But so I had a $350 a month rent payment. I had no car payment. I wasn't carrying any other debt because it was pretty straightforward to pay my credit card bills and such every month since I was living on 10% of my income. And so just that flexibility meant, again, aside from the mental hurdle of all right, I'm taking 1 step back on my income for the opportunity to grow, I could do it. I was able to do it. And that was a huge impact for being able to move forward in my career because of just what came next over the next couple of years.
I'd be interested to know, I mean, were there any triggers or anything that really told you that this opportunity was going to be something that gave you so much upside potential? Because I think we've all been in the interview or looked at the position and you thought like, this could be really good or it could be really bad. I mean, was there something in particular or you just had a really good feeling about it?
So it was a blend. I had a pretty good feeling about it. I really liked the guys. So our firm was founded by three guys, Ken, John, and Dwight. And like, I loved the conversation with them. I loved the authenticity of like, I like the people I'm going to be working with. And having started in the insurance agency where there were some good people and some, frankly, really sketchy people, like I learned really early on, there are good people in this industry and there are not so good people in this industry. So choose who you spend your time with, right? Like,
fair enough.
Who your friends are matters. Choose appropriately. So I liked the people. I liked the business model. Now, the business model was new to me. I came out of the insurance world and then an independent broker dealer that was selling everything from investments and managed accounts and mutual funds to annuities and long-term care insurance and life insurance. So here was this new thing, this firm that said, well, actually what we do is we simply provide comprehensive financial planning and then manage people's portfolio and do the planning on an ongoing basis. So Pinnacle was a firm that was early to this whole movement of wealth management under an RIA. They were founded in 93. I showed up at basically the end of 2002. And at that point, they were probably like $180 or $190 million under management, which was actually for the time, like that was a pretty big firm. The average RIA was only $20 million or something back then. So they were a good sized firm. So I could kind of see this model working for them. I really liked it. I really liked the idea that, so basically we just give people awesome financial planning so they continue to work with us and then we can manage their portfolios too. Like this seems like a really good alignment. We're basically just getting paid to service them really awesome. I like that. So I liked the people. I liked the alignment of the philosophy. And it just felt like a firm that had potential for growth. I didn't really know what that growth was going to look like, but I felt like it had a potential for growth. And frankly, and that was what happened. So I joined the firm and we were $180 million, 190, something like that, into this director of financial planning position that, as I joke now, was basically like I was a director of me, right? Like
you were the department.
Yes, I was the department. I was director of me. And then we started growing. And then it was 2003 and we took on like 70 clients and $60 or $70 million. And then it was 2004 and I personally did over 100 financial plans for millionaires. And
oh my goodness,
grew like $100+ million in a year. I was working like 75, 80 hours a week, just living out of the office, ultra intense grinding through like I was going to say it was like sort of a dark time for my career, but like it wasn't dark. I was loving it. Like I was just fully immersed into doing living, breathing financial planning. And so as we were growing, we started hiring. So my department of me was then a department of 2 and then 3 and then 4. And then I was overseeing senior planners and training new advisors coming into the firm and like suddenly had this big department around me. And suddenly by about 5 or 6 years later, it's late 2007, early 2008. The firm was, I think by that time, like had either just crossed 800 million or was closing in on 800 million. So we went from under 200 million to close to 800 million in about 6 years. 5 to 6 years.
Good Lord, that's growth.
So it was massive growth. And so with all the growth just came opportunities, right? Like I started out this $50,000 dude. 5 or 6 years later, I'm making more than double that. I've got all these people I'm managing. I've got responsibilities. And frankly, and the challenge to me, as great as all of that was, I kind of realized after 5 or 6 years of it, it wasn't entirely scratching the itch for me. And I realized that I was kind of hungry for something different, something new, something next. And what the next was, it actually started a couple of years earlier. So by 2005 or so, I started getting involved with the Financial Planning Association. And I started doing a little bit of speaking, mostly for free, just like, hey, if you'll pay my expenses, I'll come to your chapter and speak for a day. And ironically, looking back, like I was such a workaholic then. I'm still a little bit of a workaholic, but I was spending so much time in the office and basically never taking vacations that when the firm came to me and said, or when I went to the firm and said, hey, I got this opportunity to speak at this, FPA chapter in Minnesota. Is it okay if I go? They just said like, yeah, go. It's totally fine. And I'm sure looking back, they were like, he won't take a vacation. Maybe if we let him go to a speaking engagement, he'll leave the office and not come in for a day. And that's probably healthy for him.
Take a whole day off.
Yes. Just go. Don't show up for a day. It'll be good for you. So like they never hassled me. They never gave me a hard time about it. And like the most base level, because like I was still putting in the hours. Like I was getting everything done for my job and spending more than enough time there. And then wanted to do other additional stuff. So they said, sure, like you want to do more stuff beyond that, go for it.
So was that your first ever speaking gig? Was Minnesota, or can you remember what chapter was your first gig?
My first speaking gig was the local one. So FPA Maryland, we had formed a local study group in like 03, early 04. And we were looking at alternative minimum tax, which was becoming a bigger issue back then. And so I said, hey, I like studying, looking at things. I'll put together a little thing about alternative minimum tax and do it for the group. And so that was basically my first speaking engagement. Like 6 of my peers in a little study group. And it went well and people said they liked it. So they said, you should do this for the whole chapter. So I was like, oh, that's scary.
Michael Kitces, terrified to speak in front of a group of 30 people.
Yeah, but that was so the study group was first, the chapter was second. Then I was like, I had someone who'd spoken in front of 50 people or 30 or whatever it was. And then it just started to grow from there. So because I was active with FPA, there were other people that knew me. So eventually I mentioned that I had done this session. They're like, oh, well, we kind of want a session about AMT. Maybe you should come out and speak to our chapter. And so I just started picking up speaking engagements here and there. I was going to say speaking gigs, but they weren't really gigs because to me, gigs are paid and mine was not. So I probably did 2 years of speaking engagements where just they covered my expenses and I showed up so I could say that I was a speaker. And I still remember how terrified I was the first time that a chapter contacted me and wanted me to speak. And I'd already done like half a dozen or a dozen that year. I was like, you know what? I'm gonna say it's expenses plus $250. Like, you got to pay me $250 to show up, just so I can say I'm a paid speaker. I mean, even looking back, like it would cost them twice that just to fly me out and put me in a hotel.
Right.
So like it's not even that impactful. It was a mental barrier more than anything. But like I'm going to charge for speaking. And a couple of people said yes, and all of a sudden I was a paid speaker. And it really just grew from there. Like it grew from word of mouth. I got more requests at 250, so eventually I said, I'm gonna say 500 and see if people say yes. And people kept saying yes, so I was like, I'm gonna try 750, and I'm gonna try 1,000, and like I just kept inching it higher bit by bit. And people kept saying yes. And at the same time, I was starting to do a little writing as well. I was writing for Financial Planning Magazine. I'll still give a shout out to Richard Corretto, who was the editor for Financial Planning Magazine back in the early mid 2000s, who found me writing on the message forums at financialplanning.com, which back then was a very active like message forum community for financial planners. And I was actually writing there about a little of this career track that I'd had where I was working these back office jobs in financial planning and really enjoying them. And he said, you should write an article about that, which I did. It came out in something like 2005. I think it was my first like officially published article. It was called The Other Side of Financial Planning. And it was all about how I was going down this career track of being a great financial planner without having clients.
Which was really different then. I mean, that was
that's why
groundbreaking.
It was the feature story, I think, for that issue, because like it was this entire groundbreaking novel idea, like a person who's building a financial planning career that doesn't involve going out and getting all his own clients.
So you're working at Pinnacle, you've put in your time, salary's gone up, you're managing a bunch of people, you kind of learn that maybe that's not where your passion lies, and then all the speaking gets started, the writing. So talk a little bit about your transition from full-time 80 hours a week at Pinnacle to kind of where you're at today and what that process looked like.
Yeah, it was a tough transition. So I had kind of this feeling for a while that the role wasn't quite scratching the itch for me as it was. Or basically what I was finding was as I was doing a little bit more writing and speaking, it was like, okay, maybe I'm only putting in, 65 or 70 hours of Pinnacle. It was still some crazy number. And then I was doing my writing on the weekends and speaking. If I went and spoke for a day, then I'd basically make up the time I missed from the office over the weekend anyways, because I felt guilty about it. And I sort of had this realization, like, you know what? I'm so much more energized when I'm thinking about working on the next article or the next speaking gig than I am when I'm thinking about the next client plan. And I think that was kind of the realization moment for me, that it was just like, look at where I'm having fun and kind of enjoying what I'm doing. And as soon as I started reflecting on that, it became really clear, like, I'm enjoying the stuff outside the firm more than the stuff inside the firm. And that was the realization, like, okay, something needs to change here. Now, my challenge was I didn't quite know what the change would be. And of course, change is scary, particularly when money's gotten to some pretty good levels, and like I was making good money. I was still, and I would note this because again, it was relevant for the transition here. I was still living like a pauper. I was still driving the car I bought off eBay.
That's fantastic.
Actually, I think that's not true. I might have just sold it at that point and traded it in for the different car I'm now driving, which was a equally old, cheap, used car. But, like I had cars that I paid $4,000 cash for and was getting 7 to 10 years out of them. I was still living with my 3 buddies, at that point with rent increases. It was probably $400 or $500 a month. It's like my rent was $500 a month. I was, living the bachelor's life. I didn't even go out much because frankly, I was working a lot. I had no car payment. I had no debt. So like I was banking like half my income or more every year. I was hardly living on anything. And so I had this big cash reserve built up for myself that in my kind of mind, I was mentally earmarking to be a house down payment for the future whenever I got married and wanted to start a family, but was kind of a reserve. So I was looking and like, all right, I've got this speaking thing that I'm getting paid some money for. Not enough. I mean, I'm not ready to go do like 100 speaking gigs at $1,000 a piece to make up this salary that I'm making where I am. But like I'm making more on the speaking. Some of the magazines were actually now paying me to write articles. So I was making a little bit there, kind of. I had no term for it at the time, but I guess like I had a side hustle in freelance writing. And I still remember, so I was kind of germinating this idea, and it was the Next Gen conference that we ran in 2007, which I think was the second Next Gen conference. First or second, I think it was the second one. And Bob Virus was there. And so everybody knows who Bob Virus is, or hopefully knows who Bob Virus is. Bob is like the guru of writing about practice management and industry issues and has been doing it for a long, long time. And it was Bob who actually came to me and said, because he had followed my writing, and Bob does his like media reviews, and he reviewed my articles well. So I was always really excited whenever I got a good media review from Bob. And Bob said to me, you should really just start writing for yourself. And, Bob publishes a very successful newsletter business back to the industry, a couple $100 a year, has a great subscriber base, has made a very good living at it over the years. And so Bob has said to me, you should do a newsletter like I have. In fact, you can use my technology person to help get set up. And so he offered me, he actually said, like, I've already got him on retainer, like just have him do the stuff. Don't even worry about paying me back. And so Bob basically like leased out the free hours from his technology person to help me build a little website. And that's what I did. And so at like very late, I guess it was probably technically late 2007, I, set up this little website, Kitces.com. I actually had to get the website from my father, who had bought it like 10 years earlier and was using it for genealogy. So I had to get the website from him. But I got Kitces.com from him and kind of set up this little page and set up. And then about 2 or 3 months later, at the very beginning of 2008, launched a newsletter service that is still out there. He called it the Kitces Report. And as kind of the final nudge to get me going, Bob sent out a solicitation to his reading list, to his subscriber list, to say, hey, here's a new service from Michael Kitces. You've seen him in the trade publications. He's now doing his own educational newsletter. It's great stuff. You all should check it out. And poof, in the first 24 hours, I had like 200 subscribers.
Wow. Talk about proof of concept.
because they'd seen me writing, stuff in Journal of Financial Planning for years. Like, I guess looking back, I had actually made a tiny bit of a name for myself at that point, so that people were at least familiar with my writing. So being familiar with my writing and like Bob's ringing endorsement, that got stuff done. And when I was getting going, I was selling that newsletter for $150 a year. And so suddenly, like, I had 200 subscribers. There's like $30,000 of revenue, and I was inching my speaking fees higher. So there was some money. And I went back to Pinnacle and I said, look, I need to make some kind of change. I'm really excited about all this stuff that's happening in the writing and speaking world for me. I don't want to leave the firm. Like, I wanted to be attached to the firm. I still wanted to be doing some financial planning stuff, but I needed a drastic rewrite of my job description. And frankly, the partners would have been well within their rights to just say, look, you're off doing a great thing. That's awesome. Good luck to you. But you're clearly on a different direction than where our firm is right now. So, like, goodbye, farewell. But they didn't. I don't know if they were just feeling gracious, or I kind of joke. I think they had sort of decided that, like, I seem to be a good person to have around and good things happen, but they couldn't figure out what to do with me. So they just figured as long as I was willing to take enough of a salary cut, it wouldn't be that expensive to keep me around, and I could still be the technical geek of last resort for all the financial planning questions that still came up from our clients. And they'd keep me around. And that's what they did. And so at the beginning of 2008, I kind of went through all these transitions at once. I launched the newsletter service with support from Bob Virus. I was kind of slowly continuing to inch forward the speaking career, and I kept a moderate salary for what basically was like a rewritten job description to sort of be like a part-time of counsel on retainer sort of role for Pinnacle. I call it like the geek of last resort role. So just all the weird, hard financial planning questions and issues that would come up from our clients that no one knew how to answer, like, that would be my thing to answer, and I would support on those issues.
Which, with a large firm, that's an incredibly valuable person to have, because ultimately you need somebody that can answer those questions. But if they can't keep you full-time, they could at least have you answering those questions and let somebody else do the stuff that you were doing that you didn't need to be Michael Kitces to do.
Yep. And so even then, it was still like another one of these one step back to take two steps forward kinds of things. Even when you bundled it all together, like not knowing what my speaking revenue was going to look like that year. I mean, I think I was projecting that like it could be a 20 to 30% haircut to my earnings at that point. But I was feeling more emboldened by it because, frankly, I'd done it the first time when I went to Pinnacle. I took a 15% pay cut, and 6 years later, I doubled my income. So I was feeling pretty good that, like, as long as you get on a growth engine, good things come. And so I was ready to do another one of those. And again, as I'd said, like, and I was living on next to nothing and had all my core expenses down to almost nothing. So aside from the mental barrier of getting over, I'm going to make a lot less money this year because I hope I'm going to make it up in the future. I had no lifestyle spending, living constraints that complicated the matter. And again, that made it a lot easier to do the transition.
Yeah, I can't stress that point any more than you already have. And I just can't tell people this often enough. And that is that you've got to get your personal house in order. Whether you want to start your own firm or you want to start becoming a speaker or whatever it is that really drives you. We tell clients this all the time. If you want to do your own thing, you've got to have flexibility. If you want to make a change, you've got to have that ability to pivot. And by keeping your expenses low, as hard as it is, avoiding that lifestyle creep, which actually there was a really great article that Michael was featured in recently in Forbes, actually, talking about his avoidance of lifestyle creep and kind of keeping things very cheap, because it would have been really easy to make 100 and spend 100,000. And then all of a sudden, when you want to make that drop to 80, you can't do it.
Well, and once you're used to spending that, it's so brutal to make a transition. Like, when I just never really brought a lot of that stuff into my lifestyle, I didn't know what to miss. Like, I've never had a new car, so I don't know what it's like to give up not having new cars anymore, because I've just never had a new car, so I don't miss it. And there's a lot of that. I mean, I still try to spend some money on things that I'll enjoy. I buy a lot of technology tools and gadgets in particular because I really enjoy that kind of stuff. But just sort of keeping like the core lifestyle stuff really low, like when you buy a cheap car that you paid cash for and you're paying next to nothing for rent, like even splurges are not really very big money at that point, right? Like a fancy new phone or something is still kind of a drop when I was spending $500 a month on rent at the time. So Yeah, like just I find a lot of people when they're looking at making these transitions, like they get themselves stuck in all this like, oh, well, I took out this mortgage because the bank said I could afford it. And it's like, well, okay, the bank lent you that money because by definition, that's the absolute maximum that they figured you could pay without going bankrupt, because they don't want you to default on the mortgage. That has nothing to do with whether that's a prudent amount of money to borrow. That's like, that's the limit that they think you won't default at. And I just see so many people that get into these situations where, they buy the best car that the lender will let them buy, or they buy the biggest house the lender will let them buy, or they buy the biggest apartment that they can get approved for. And it puts them in these positions where they don't have the room to take one step back, to take two steps forward in the career. And it's so painful to take one step back on their living expenses to try to take two steps forward, because now you're just so focused on all the things that you're going to have to give up that you're used to having as part of your lifestyle, because it's hard to give things up, right? We have all the research about that effect. And so if you just don't put it in, it's not a problem. When you put in, you have to take it out, it's a lot worse. And so I've always been kind of cognizant about managing that on an ongoing basis, because it's let me make a lot of career moves that were very good to me in the long run that I absolutely could not have done if I hadn't preserved the flexibility for myself in the first place.
So at this point, you've kind of become the Michael Kitces that we all know, and kind of how many of us, myself included, started following you and meeting you, which is the Michael Kitces that's speaking at 50 to 70 conferences a year and writing the blog. And
well, I guess technically there's actually one more transition to it that's worth noting. The blog actually came later. So when I launched Kitces.com, it was basically there to serve two functions. One, it was basically my digital marketing brochure for a speaker, right? So like if you wanted to know what topics I had, like go to my website and it lists all my speaking topics. And then the other thing that it was there for was just to let people subscribe to my newsletter, right? Like if you're going to buy a digital newsletter, so you got to go to some website where you click the pay button and do it. And that was the primary function of the website. Now, I had included a blog on the original website because, blogging was out there and other people seemed to blog. And the newsletter was basically built from the start to be like advanced technical topics that would be eligible for CFP-CE credit. So I was limited into what I could write in the newsletter. I couldn't write about practice management and industry issues. And because my newsletters were all long, if I, had like merely a 4-page article to write about some topic, it wouldn't work for the newsletter, because the newsletter stuff was all like 10 to 20 page huge treatises. So I made this blog of like, well, here's what I'll write about either practice management stuff or sort of short technical topics on the side that I can't put anywhere else. And so I started writing it for a couple of months, and I really just felt like I was publishing to like the internet nether space. Like you just hit publish and it goes out there and you wonder if anybody's reading it. So I installed Google Analytics to look at it, and I figured out that basically no one was reading it. Like I had no readership. No one was coming to my site. Like I had newsletter readers that were paying for the paid stuff that I sent out by email, but no one was coming to my blog. And so I basically gave up on it. I said, all right, I don't get this whole blogging thing. I guess it works in other industries, but not ours. And so I walked away from it almost entirely for about 2 years and published virtually nothing from like the middle of 2008 until the fall of 2010. And then it was in the middle of 2010 and watching social media rise that the shift kind of came for me. And the one I'll give credit for kind of getting me on this path was Bill Winterberg, who now we kind of know as advisor technology guru, although back then he was still getting going in that path. And Bill and I knew each other going back 10 plus years to when he worked actually as an employee in a local firm just a little ways up the street from Pinnacle. So, we were both like junior level employees in planning firms and had stayed friends over the years. And so Bill was telling me, because Bill's much more the tech guy than I am, Bill was telling me, you got to check out this Twitter thing. It's really cool. And we were in a study group together, and he was showing it to me the summer of 2010 while we were out gathered together for our study group. And I was looking, I was like, oh, this is kind of neat. So I signed up for Twitter and I started following some people, and I started finding I was getting interesting stuff to read off of Twitter. Like I was following trade pubs and some people that I found that tweeted out interesting stuff. And I was reading all this content that I was finding through Twitter. And I had like the proverbial eureka light bulb above your head moment, like one of those things happened for me where I went, oh my God, like I get it now. I knew how to make content. I didn't know how to get it out there so anybody could see it and find it. Social media is how you get it out there. Like, oh, I just have to get involved in these social media platforms. I'm already making the content. I can share it there. I read a ton of stuff. I can share the other stuff I'm reading as well. That seems to be what other people are doing on Twitter, and it works really well. So I'm going to do that. And that was kind of the birth of sort of me into the social media world, and sort of the birth/rebirth of the blog, since it had existed in 2008, but it was in a defunct form. So I relaunched in 2010, and I kind of view that as the official start date for the blog as it exists now. And that's really been the piece that's propelled me in my career over the past 5 years. Just the growth of that blog from, I'll be coming up shortly here on the 5-year anniversary of sort of the blog and its rebirth from 2010. And I was looking at the numbers. I mean, it's come from like back when I was getting going, I would have like 15 to 20 people a day would show up at that site. Most of them were probably Google crawling bots anyways. Now the site gets like 100,000 unique visitors in a month. I've built a small media company on the side just by trying to give and share content that's helpful for me. And once again, as with all the other steps, in fact, more so, like it's just been a tremendous growth in my career, my income, my ability to keep moving forward is now all built entirely around having that blog, having that site, having that platform of my own that becomes a way for people to find me, whether it's they want to work with our advisory firm, or they want to work with me, or they want me to speak, or they want me to consult with them, or all the other businesses that I'm attached to as well, including XY Planning Network and how we got this launched. Like a lot of that is just driven off of creating this social media blog presence and building that as a brand. And frankly, as I look at my like long-term business and career from here, notwithstanding the fact that I'm a partner in a number of businesses that have really significant value of their own, I've really gotten to the point now where I view my number one asset is really that website and that blog and the brands that I've built, because that gives me options and choices for a virtually unlimited number of things in the future. And that's really kind of my whole world philosophy, career philosophy is like if you're investing in yourself first, you just open a lot of doors in the future. And I mean, there's things I'm doing now I never would have dreamt I was going to be doing 5 years ago, much less 10 years ago. It's kind of fluid to me. I don't even know exactly where it's going to go, but I know that having kind of a central brand and platform of my own becomes sort of the anchor and the true north for me. And that lets me build other businesses and other things and help in other ways going forward. And I know it sounds trite, but like I've truly lived the experience, particularly over the last 5 years of running the blog, that basically the more I give away for free, the more successful my businesses are and the more money I make. And I've literally lived that for the past 5 years.
You've brought up a couple really awesome points here as we're kind of coming to a close. And for anybody that's interested, Michael actually told me about this book called Free, A Radical New Pricing Structure or Pricing Model. We'll do a link to the Amazon.
And actually have an article that just came out about the book as well. A fascinating read.
It's a wonderful book that just talks about this business model of literally giving it away for free. And, we talk to advisors all the time about doing content marketing and blogging and that sort of thing. And advisors will frequently ask me, well, why would a client hire me if I tell them everything I know on my blog? And Michael's just a fabulous example of you can still make money and many times a lot more money by giving away a lot of the content for free and then kind of having businesses and other, we'll say, monetization strategies, which kind of outside that initial core business. Because for most people, and this is something I go back and forth, Michael, on quite a bit, most people would be advertising on the blog. And if you get on his blog, you'll see there's no advertising. There's no banners. There's no pop-ups. There's the only thing he's advertising is himself and a little bit to some of the other businesses on the side. So it's actually a really fascinating business model. But I think it's good to note that you had no idea that this is where you were going to end up. This really, I won't say it wasn't intentional because you made a couple of really good pivots whenever they felt right. But ultimately, this has grown because you were willing to take the risk of the unknown, of not knowing what was going to come next.
But again, like even for me, it was sort of, it was the risk of the unknown because I built such a base for myself that like I had flexibility. I had fallback options. Particularly where I am now, it's an interesting dynamic. Like I know I'll have options no matter what happens going forward because I built this strong brand. But even through the other transitions that I've had, like I kept living expenses low. I had reserves. I mean, I still kind of remember going into the Pinnacle meeting when I did in 2008 to make the transition that even then I'd built enough of a name for myself that I knew if it didn't work out with Pinnacle, I would be able to find a job somewhere else. And I didn't do it consciously at the time, but I think looking back, like I basically went into that meeting with the partners with a complete, like, I don't care how this meeting comes out. I hope it goes well. And if it doesn't, I'm just going to find someplace else to land. And I think being in a position to be able to go in with that attitude is probably part of what actually got the deal done in the first place.
That confidence is huge. The confidence to be able to say, this is what I'm going to do. You know, I remember we had an advisor that was looking to join the XY Planning Network and started to launch their own firm. And whenever they basically went in and said, hey, I'm done, I'm leaving, I'm going to launch my own firm, the owner just said, hey, what do you need to stay? And they kind of outlined, I want this, 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 and this. And they got everything they asked for because it wasn't a, hey, could I please have a few more vacation days? It was, hey, I don't need you. I have my own kind of business model revenue structure over here set up. I can do my own thing. And it's amazing the leverage that confidence provides.
It really is. And it grew for me personally over time. The first transition I only made because I tried to give myself up for a job for 25 grand and got turned down. That's the only reason I made the first transition, right? Like I had no confidence. I made a transition because I had to, because I was failing out of sales and I had no other job. Even by the second transition, like it was pretty terrifying when I went to Pinnacle. I was kind of taking one step back to take two steps forward. And I think only because at that time, I just so knew I had outgrown my current position and there was no upside for where I was, that I was only willing to make the second transition because I could handle the financial shift of taking one step back. And I at least could see that there was more potential for this job to grow if the firm grew because a department could grow underneath me. I didn't have to move up into a ceiling that was existing. It really wasn't until the 2008 transition where I launched the site and really went into the writing and speaking business more significantly that I had actually gotten to the confidence level to say, like, okay, now I'm really ready to go in with attitude. Let's see what we can get done. And if we can't, you know what, I'm just going to go find something somewhere else and I'll live and I'll move on. But it took 8 years of my career to get there. And frankly, even then, I'm still not sure I would have made the transition without Bob Virus's support. And, you know, I still am so thankful to him that even then it took some of his nudge to make me willing to make that transition. I could afford it. I had a job. I would be able to find a job to fall back on. I was pretty confident of that. But still, like, it took a nudge to really being willing to take a step off that cliff. I found like the more I've done it over the years, the easier it's gotten. But it takes time to find that confidence in yourself.
It's so true. It's such good advice. Well, as we're wrapping up, as anyone who knows the two of us know, we could literally just sit here and talk for hours. Our kids will be in college before we're done. So I am really excited we got the opportunity to kind of hear your backstory because I don't think that's a story that gets told all that often. But one thing, and I did not warn Michael that I was going to do this, but Michael is someone who tends to launch one major project at a time. And so whenever you kind of look at your past, kind of been one focus. And there was a project that Michael was going to work on whenever I pitched the idea of XY Planning Network on him back in December of 2013. And it completely derailed him. And so I'm going to put it out there into the listenership for anybody who decides to hear this, that you can bug him by email, by Twitter. You can be sure to let him know if this is of interest. Michael has been wanting to start a podcast for years.
Just like this.
Interviews and just sharing information and sharing more content for free. So if you think that Kitces Radio or Kitces Podcast, whatever the name ends up being, is something that you'd be interested in listening in on, hit him up on Twitter, hit him up by email, let him know that that's something that'll be of interest because I've been pushing it. He's been wanting to do it. So a little bit more of a nudge, another Bob Barris situation here of just giving that little bit of a push. Maybe we'll push him over the edge and get that podcast launched. So I apologize, but I couldn't resist. So
I understand.
The last question I have for you, and this is something we ask everybody that's on the show. If you could go back and give yourself one piece of advice, this is probably your 22, 23-year-old self as you're getting into the profession and you're looking at kind of these initial pivots and what you want to do with your career. If you could go back and give yourself one piece of advice, what do you wish you had known then?
Oh, man. Like, that's really hard for me because, as I said, there are things that happened for me early on that I guess by any classic sense we would call failures, right? Like, I was a life insurance agent who barely validated my contract for the first year and clearly wasn't going to make it the second year. So I tried to get a $25,000 job and couldn't even get that. So, like, I guess that's about as failure gets. But like, even then, I still look at them as just learning steps, learning experience. Like, there's almost nothing that I've done in my career looking back that I regret having done or wish I'd done differently. I guess the only piece really that probably came a little bit later is, I think still over the years in the class sense, I've been too slow to hire out more staff and support for myself. And when I've occasionally had people that weren't the best fit, I've been too slow to fire them and move on. And that's probably been my biggest blocking point. So I guess like it would be my advice to my 23-year-old self, but I wouldn't have cared about it until I was about 29 or 30. And I got to a point in my career where I was making some of those decisions. But just there's a lot you can do by leveraging your own personal productivity. And I spent a lot of time focusing on that because, as you noted, I like write and put out way too much content as is. And I am a bit of a workaholic, but you can only do so much yourself before you need a team, you need support, you need good people around you. And I'm certainly as guilty as anyone of having been very slow to learn and internalize that lesson of not just the value of having good people around you, but truly like the value of getting good people around you. And if you have people that aren't good people around you, you need to let them go and cut them loose and move on as quickly as possible. I guess that would probably be the advice I'd give to myself looking back is just recognize how much value there is in having good people that work with you. You can do so much more as a team and a group than you can solo, even as awesome as technology and the rest lets you be in today's world.
And probably reiterating that point of keep those living expenses under control, because it really does allow you to make some moves that you wouldn't have been able to make otherwise.
Yep.
Michael, thank you so much for taking the time to be on this episode of XYPN Radio. Look forward to having you on future episodes.
Likewise, looking forward to when we get to be co-hosts and ask other people hard questions.
Looking forward to it.
Awesome. Thanks, everyone, for listening in. Hope you're enjoying the podcast.
Oh, man, what an awesome show. I have been business partners with Michael for over 18 months now. I've known him for probably 4 years, and I did not know a lot of what we actually just learned about his path. And so I hope for all the newer advisors that are tuning in, you realize just how valuable every step of the process can be. And honestly, that failure can be redefined as a success and just such a wonderful learning experience. And I think Kitces' background and story really showcase that. Now, before we go, I do want to give another quick shout out to our launch week sponsor, Low Load Insurance Services. Now, I have personally worked with Low Load for over 4 years now, and I have to say that they are such an incredibly valuable member of your financial planning team. As fee-only advisors, we simply can't transact insurance for our clients, and telling clients to go shop for coverage with a local insurance agent certainly isn't ideal. So I have found that working with LLIS allows me to provide such a high level of service when it comes to insurance that I could never provide on my own, since they have a growing team of over 16 insurance specialists that know all the ins and outs of the insurance industry. If you'd like to learn more, go to LLIS.com, or you can check out a link to their website in our show notes. And also be sure to tune in for episode 5 at xyplanningnetwork.com/5 for an in-depth interview with Mark Maurer, CEO of LLIS. And as always, definitely shoot us any questions that you have, topics you'd like covered, or if you'd like to be a guest on our show at radio@xyplanningnetwork.com. Thanks everybody for tuning in.
You're not alone, and you're not crazy. It's scary starting, building, and growing your own financial planning firm. And that's why we put together a free private community just for you, the Cutting Edge Financial Planner. Go to xyplanningnetwork.com/VIP or text XYPN Radio to 33344 and join a network of thousands ready to change the lives of Gen X and Gen Y clients.